Hello, today I'm going to be talking about bioethanol, one of the most common and exciting biofuels out there. It's already being used around the world, and it has the potential to make a big difference in how we power our cars and reduce pollution. So what exactly is bioethanol? It's basically a type of alcohol made by fermenting sugars or starches from plants, things like corn or sugarcane or even plant waste. It's completely renewable. It burns way cleaner than gasoline, and we can blend it into our regular fuel for cars and trucks. The cool part is that the carbon used to make bioethanol originally comes from the atmosphere. Plants pull the CO2 during a process that they go through called photosynthesis, which we all know. And then when we burn the ethanol, that carbon dioxide, CO2, goes back into the air. So the cycle is a lot more balanced than it is with fossil fuels that release ancient carbon. The main crops used for bioethanol depend on where you're located, obviously, because different plants grow in different areas. Some locations might have constant cold weather, while other places, like our wonderful state of Texas we choose to live in, is practically a constant sauna. So what plant is used in your area is all dependent on what plant is able to thrive in your environment. In the US, corn is our biggest use. Farmers grow and harvest corn, which is then processed to extract the starch. However, in Brazil, sugarcane is the top source because it's already full of natural sugar that's super easy to ferment, pretty much requiring no work. Researchers are also developing cellulosic bioethanol, which uses things like corn stalks, grasses, and wood chips instead of food crops. That's a huge step forward because it doesn't compete with the food supply like sugarcane and corn do. You might be wondering how bioethanol is even made. Well, making bioethanol starts by breaking down the plant material into simple sugars. Then yeast is added, and that's where all of the magic happens. The yeast ferments the sugars into ethanol and carbon dioxide, kind of like how yeast makes alcohol when brewing beer. Here's the basic idea. Glucose, as we commonly know it as sugar, is transformed into ethanol, carbon dioxide, and energy. After fermentation, the ethanol is distilled and purified until it's fuel grade, which means we can use it for our vehicles. When it's blended with gasoline, usually E10, which is 10% ethanol, or E85, which is 85% ethanol, for fuel flex vehicles. Bioethanol isn't just a science experiment like some may assume. It's already in use everywhere, and you may not even know it. Most gasoline in the US actually contains some ethanol. So without even knowing it, you're helping the environment every time you fill your car with gas. Well, for the most part. But advanced forms like cellulosic ethanol made from non-food plants, like we talked about earlier, are still being developed and have not yet been released. They're way more eco-friendly, but way harder to make on a large scale. This is because breaking down plant fibers takes a lot of energy and lots of special enzymes. One of the main benefits of bioethanol is that it helps lower greenhouse gas emissions. Since the plants used to make it absorb carbon dioxide when they grow, the overall carbon footprint is much smaller than your average gasoline. That said, it's definitely not totally perfect. If the production processes use too much fossil fuel energy or fertilizer, the carbon savings go down. But on average, bioethanol can cut emissions by around 30 to 70% depending on how it's produced, and that is a lot. Economically, bioethanol supports farmers and creates new jobs in rural areas. It gives crops like corn and sugarcane a new purpose and helps reduce our dependence on imported oil, like we do today. But there are challenges too. Using food crops for fuel can push up food prices tremendously, and building ethanol plants takes a lot of money and water. So while it's great for local economies, it definitely needs to be balanced carefully. You've probably seen gas pumps labeled E10 or E85. That's part of how bioethanol is being introduced to the public. Governments and fuel companies have run education campaigns to help people understand that using ethanol blended fuel can reduce emissions and support local agriculture. There's still some confusion and definitely some skepticism, but awareness is definitely growing. After looking at the data, I think bioethanol is a really strong step toward cleaner energy. It's renewable, it's already in use, so we know it works, and it helps cut emissions. But it's not the final solution. We need to make production more efficient and less dependent on food crops. My recommendation is to keep investing in cellulosic and algae-based ethanol, which can use waste materials instead of our food sources. If funding was not an obstacle and money just weren't an issue, I'd invest in research on better enzymes and microbes that break down plant fibers faster. I would invest in a large-scale biorefineries that turn crop waste into ethanol. I would invest in partnerships with car companies to build engines designed for higher ethanol blends so we can keep upping the ethanol without ruining car engines. And I would also invest in more public education about how biofuels can help the environment and economy. With enough funding, bioethanol could play a huge role in building a low-carbon, sustainable energy future. Here are the sources I used to find most of that information. Thank you for watching. Bioethanol definitely isn't a perfect biofuel, but it is one of the best bridges we've been able to see between fossil fuels and a cleaner, renewable future.